Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to give it a few more minutes to wait for more folks to hop on. Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you're here for a webinar on understanding advocacy and church services advocacy in particular, and maybe an intro to getting engaged in advocacy, you're in the right place. We're going to wait a couple minutes before kicking things off, but um, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, and we'll get started at maybe 3 past the hour. All righty, it's 3 past the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Once again, this is a webinar on understanding church world service advocacy and what it is, how you might be able to make an impact. I'm gonna sort of speak for a little bit and of course introduce myself, and then there will be time for questions and answer towards the end. I'll probably only go for 20 minutes or so, and then hope folks are able to put in questions. There is a question and answer box that I encourage you to use at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to raise questions as the presentation is ongoing. And then also, of course, again, there will be time at the end to answer those questions and to consider more. This webinar is being recorded. And so I believe if you have registered for it, you should get a copy of the recording in the follow-up. And we can think about some additional resources to share as well in follow-up. Really thrilled to see people calling in from so many different places around the country, which I think is really exciting and important. And part of what we're going to talk about is why where you're from is important in your advocacy efforts. But let me start by introducing myself a little bit and then talking through a little bit what I'm hoping to cover today. And like I said, really encourage folks to share questions in the chat as well. So my name is Danilo. I'm the Director of Policy at Church World Service. I'm actually based in Philadelphia, although I'm down in DC quite a bit. I was actually just in DC yesterday. And I spend quite a bit of my time alongside other members of the CWS policy team on the Hill, engaging with members of Congress and their staff, engaging at times with the administration as well, in support of changing policies to reflect our vision as an organization, which is a world where all people have food, voice, and a safe place to call home. And of course, CWS has been fighting for that vision for now, I think we can say 80 years. Used to be close to 80, but now we're nearing that 80-year mark. And so that's part of what I'm hoping to share here is a little bit more about that work of engaging with policymakers in DC. But a lot of what we do on the CWS advocacy team is also working to provide information and tools for people across the country to engage in advocacy themselves, both on issues that Church World Service cares about, but also just to provide the tools for you all to understand what advocacy is and engage in advocating on issues that might be relevant or important to your community, whether or not they touch on the issues that CWS advocates for. But I want to share some of that information today. So maybe I can get started by just sharing a little bit about what advocacy even is. And our definition of advocacy is really identifying problems or challenges within our community or the communities that we serve, and engaging in actions to encourage the change of those policies, whether through directly engaging with policymakers who have the power to change them, or through changing of attitudes and public opinion. And I think it's really important to understand that, we have representatives, and part of their job is to listen to their constituents. And so as much as I'm in DC a lot of the time knocking on the door of congressional offices, it is far more effective for someone who is a constituent of that office, whether it's a senator or whether it's a representative, or whether it's a state and local official, of which you also have many if you're calling in the United States, and engaging with them on these issues. And I can tell you from experience that it is far more likely that a member will be responsive to some of the key policy asks around hunger, around displacement that Church World Service has, if they've heard about those issues from their constituents, even through just a phone call to an intern. And I think that's one of the key things I want to get across today is that it really does make an impact to be engaging in advocacy, even if you're just one person making a phone call once a week or every morning. And even if you're only getting through to like the voicemail, or you're just sending an email to an inbox, you're not sure it's getting really received and read. I promise you, all those calls and all those emails actually are tallied. And at the end of the week, these members get lists of what have their constituents raised this week. What are the issues that we're hearing about? And so it is so important, even just those small things, making a phone call and sharing your perspective. But we're going to talk about sort of various ways of engaging in advocacy. Another thing I want to say that's really, really important is that you don't need to be an expert to be an effective advocate. A lot of the policymaking process can be extremely messy, it can be complicated, it can be opaque if you follow the news. It can be very difficult to understand exactly how Congress works. You can often trust policymakers to not get things done, or to rely on kind of strange rules for blocking what seems like overwhelmingly supported policies. And I think at times this kind of messiness or this obfuscation is deliberate. It's daunting for newcomers to come to advocacy on an issue who might not understand all the lingo and the acronyms. And often that results in people not engaging in advocacy at all. But I think it's really important, again, that what really matters when you're engaging in advocacy on an issue is to be able to lift up your voice, to lift up the voices of those who have been marginalized and maybe haven't been heard by policymakers, to share the story, your story of why you care about the issue, and to describe who you are, what you want, and why you care. And those three things, who you are, what you want, and why you care, are at the core of any advocacy message, and at the core of any message with policymakers. And what I've found through many, many years of bringing folks to meetings with their elected officials is that almost everyone can share those three things with very little preparation, because you know who you are, you know why you're there often, what you are there to ask for, and you know why you care. I mean, it's just your personal connection to these issues. So I think it's really important, again, to understand that advocacy can be quite easy. Of course, um, it is very complicated, the policymaking process. And so it's important to understand um, as you begin considering engaging in advocacy, sort of who holds the power over the issue that you're interested in. So sometimes there might be a lot of power vested in the presidential administration. Sometimes there might be power vested in Congress. Sometimes that power is vested in states and localities. And maybe one example I can share is with respect to SNAP and uh, support for needy families and supplemental food assistance offered by the federal government. So last year, in the passage of what was called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there was a substantial cut, both in terms of total funding for the SNAP program and in terms of eligibility for refugees and newcomers who Church World Service serves um, to access supplemental food assistance. And so the advocacy that we did began at the congressional level when they were passing this legislation and working on this legislation. And we did succeed at getting some exceptions included. So anyone who had a green card, anyone who was a Cuban or Haitian entrant was excluded from these eligibility changes, in part due to advocacy with members of Congress who were engaging in negotiations. But then that bill passed and was signed into law by the administration. And then it became up to the administration to implement these policies. But the way that SNAP works, it's somewhat complicated. The food assistance program is sort of implemented by the federal government, but distributed out through the states. And the states actually do a lot of the implementation on the ground. And one of the challenges we had run into was the administration was attempting to interpret the eligibility changes much more broadly than they should have been. And so there were people who should not have been cut off from SNAP who were, according to the administration's guidance. So we worked at the state level and directly engaging with the Department of Agriculture, USDA, who issued that guidance, to urge the administration to clarify its guidance to protect people again who should have remained eligible for food assistance. And that was effective. Ultimately, 21 states filed a lawsuit, issued a statement, pushed the administration to change its guidance, and the administration did so last year. But still, there are many people who were cut off from food assistance and continue to be cut off. And so the next aspect of our advocacy was pushing at the state level, and this continues to this day, working with states to pass funding for supplemental SNAP programs and help fill in the gaps left behind by these cuts made by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that's an example of how advocacy at sort of all these different levels on the same issue can be incredibly powerful. But it is important to understand as you consider advocacy, who holds power in this scenario? Has the bill already passed? In that case, maybe we need to think about how it's being implemented and who's responsible for that implementation. Is the policy already in place? Are there ways that members of Congress can engage in oversight, for example, and ask questions? Or can states respond and help fill in the gaps? So these, I think, are important elements of policy and advocacy work. Another important element is understanding that you don't need to get to sort of the big names in order to make a difference. So again, sometimes when we do meetings on Capitol Hill, we meet with members of Congress themselves, a senator or a representative. But oftentimes we meet with staffers. And I know sometimes advocates are concerned, is a staffer actually going to have any weight in changing a policy? But the reality is oftentimes staffers have even more authority and knowledge of these issues than the members do. And in fact, can make a bigger difference when you can convince a staffer of your perspective than a member themselves. And there are staffers with quite a bit of power on Capitol Hill and elsewhere for other policymakers as well. And then I think it's really important, whichever policymaker you're engaging with on some of these issues, it's important to understand that there's usually a lot of things they can do. I mean, something we sometimes run into is people who say, I'm represented by people who already agree with me and they're already pushing for these things. So there's no point in me engaging with this member of Congress because we're already on the same page. But that's actually not the case very often. There's so many ways that members can take additional action in support of your priorities. Um, it's not just about passing legislation or co-sponsoring bills that they might be already a part of. It's about supporting funding. Of course, Congress has the power of the purse. It's about conducting oversight. Often members will be involved in hearings with administration officials, and they'll need to prioritize which questions they ask. It's about using their voice. These members often have very powerful voices, are in the news quite a lot, and are able to uplift issues. So even if they are supportive, there's a lot of ways they can do more to respond to the issues that you might be prioritizing in your advocacy. And so it's important when you do have a meeting with a policymaker or their staff to encourage them to think of new ways and additional ways of taking action if they already agree with your priority. And it's important in that respect to do some research if you're engaging in a meeting with a member of Congress or a policymaker or their staff on, what kind of committees are they on? What are their statements on these issues already been? I think those are really important as well. So, okay, with all that, a kind of general discussion of policy and advocacy and some of the general rules of engaging in advocacy issues. Again, trying to do some research and think through who your target is, understanding if there's an issue that you're trying to address, who holds power in changing that policy or addressing that problem in your community. And then recognizing that it doesn't take expertise to be an effective advocate. It doesn't take more than being able to share who you are, what you want, and why you care about the issue. And as a constituent, your voice carries a lot of weight, even if you're not an expert on all the minutiae of the policy issue. So with all that, I'm happy to share a little bit about CWS's current policy and engagement and issues, but also just ways that folks can get engaged in our work. And we often think about sort of a ladder of engagement. There might be folks on this call who are very, very new to advocacy issues, or folks who have attended advocacy days and events and participated in meetings with their members of Congress already. Regardless, there's, again, and maybe you don't have time to be engaging in a lot of different advocacy activities, but still want to be engaged and informed. I think the first step of that ladder is about attending conversations like these, is about staying informed about what's going on. Of course, Church World Service provides a lot of resources to help stay informed. We have a daily state of play resource that focuses mostly on refugee and migration issues, but also touches on hunger response. There's a lot of resources that CWS provides and that you can find elsewhere to help you stay informed about what's going on. But it's also important to understand what's going on in your communities. And often you all are more of an expert on those than organizations like CWS is. But that's the first step, is trying to stay informed. And then the next step in that ladder is sending an email to your elected leader, whether it's a member of Congress or state and local elected leader, or to someone in the administration. And again, these emails can be pretty light lifts, but they make a big difference. And there are many, many examples of those emails. And in fact, in a second, I will share how to use Church World Service's action alerts to easily, with a couple clicks, send an email to your members of Congress, or in some cases to your state and local elected officials, to encourage them to support certain policy priorities. It really is a light lift to send an email like that. And again, using action alerts, you can do it in just a few seconds. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. The next kind of step in the ladder is making a phone call, which tends to be a little bit more impactful than just an email. Often you're speaking to a staffer for the member or elected leader, and the conversation, could go in a number of different ways. But we also provide like scripts for those phone calls where you can have some talking points at the ready. And the action alerts we have, again, that I'll share a little bit how to use, make it really easy to call your members of Congress as well. The next step in that ladder of engagement after sending emails and making phone calls is attending a public event. So a lot of times elected leaders will hold public events in their communities, in their districts, in their states. There's a variety of ways of finding out when those public events happen. There's no public repository, though. You can't just find out in one easy place, whether your member of Congress, for example, is holding a town hall or a public event. But you can find them by signing up for mailing lists, by monitoring your elected officials' social media, checking the members' websites and event pages. And it's important to note that for members of Congress, many of them spend long recess periods at home in their district. So even though they're sort of working in DC, they do come back fairly regularly with the express purpose of engaging with their constituents. And so these events actually do happen somewhat regularly. And I will, when I share my screen in a second, show a little bit more about how to do some of that initial research. And of course, part of all that is figuring out who your elected leaders are. And there is no shame in not knowing. I think most Americans actually don't know who all of their elected leaders are, certainly when it comes to state and local electeds. But it's really easy to find out. And so I will show you a little bit about that as well. So with that, let me share a little bit about what's going on right now and the advocacy that we're focused on. And then I'm going to share my screen. And then I will pause for question and answer, hopefully to get a little bit more information about your all's questions relating to advocacy issues and how you might be able to engage. So with Church World Service, we are a refugee resettlement agency. We've been supporting those who have been forced to flee their homes for decades. And that remains a focus of our advocacy today, especially in the context of the current administration has been targeting refugees who have already been resettled, who have already gone through years of vetting and screening, and most recently attempting to target them for arrests and sort of re-interviews. So in Minnesota, a number of resettled refugees were detained, shackled, and sent to Texas and subject to re-interview screening while in detention in Texas, including families. Then the administration has announced that policy. They're intending to implement it nationwide. Right now, those policies are blocked. At least the arrest part of the policy are blocked by a court. But one of the things we've been trying to do is get more information from the administration about its plans for implementation and urge Congress to conduct oversight over these policies. So I will show in one of our action alerts a little bit more about that. Another thing we've been doing is trying to implement some substantive legislative guardrails on immigration enforcement, especially as we've seen some ICE actions in places of worship, in schools, in hospitals, what had previously, even under the first Trump administration, and certainly throughout the last 30 years or so, had been deemed sensitive locations, and ICE activity had not happened in those places. This administration repealed that sensitive locations protections early last year. And so we have seen instances of disruptions and enforcement actions at places of worship, schools, and hospitals. So we've been encouraging support for legislation like the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act. And amid ongoing negotiations happening right now in Congress around these legislative guardrails and trying to provide some accountability for some of the immigration enforcement that we've seen, we've been pushing members to support the protections of some of these areas from enforcement actions absent exigent circumstances, as well as other protections and guardrails against some of the more lawless and chaotic actions that we've seen from immigration enforcement. So that's another aspect of our work. We're also, as I mentioned, working to respond to the impact of the eligibility and funding cuts for SNAP and for Medicaid that have impacted refugees and newcomers most specifically, but really have impacted everyone around the country who relies on some of these vital programs. And so we've been working on that. And the last thing I'd mention is the many refugees. There's actually over 100,000 refugees who had been approved to come to the US when the refugee ban went into place last year. There's many who are in particularly vulnerable circumstances. There's around 15,000 uh, Iranians who are victims of religious persecution in Iran right now as the war continues, who had family members in the US and applied for resettlement and were in the pipeline. That specific program, it's called the Lautenberg program, has been halted by the administration, and that's a subject of our advocacy um, this year as well. So those are a couple of things that we are advocating on. I'm going to share my screen quickly just to provide an example of how easy it is to engage in advocacy on some of these issues using CWS's tools, and how easy it is to find out a little bit more about your members of Congress, regardless of whether you want to conduct advocacy on these issues or others that are important to you and your community. So let me share my screen. I think tried this earlier, so I hope that it will work. There we go. Okay, so we're on Google. I think the easiest way to show people how to access some of these materials is to go to a blank Google screen and show people how it works. So if you just look up CWS action alerts on Google, you can pop over here. If you scroll down, you can sign up. So every time we release a new action alert, you can get that in your inbox. But you can see our latest action alerts here as well. So as I mentioned, one of our key issues right now is engaging in ongoing negotiations around the Department of Homeland Security funding and preventing and I should say implementing some guardrails on ICE and CBP after some of the ICE activity that we've seen in recent weeks. So the way our action alerts work is you can see the title here. There's a little bit more information at the top so you can better understand what's going on. And we try to keep this as updated as possible. You can see this one was just updated March 25th. That's yesterday. And then here is where the important stuff happens. So to act, you just need to type in your name and put in your address, and I will put in my address currently. And what's important is to actually click on one of these dots. If you just put in your address without clicking on the populated field, sometimes it has some trouble. Put in my email. We do click phone numbers to support you in making a phone call, but we do not use that phone number for anything else. So we're not sending spam texts or anything like that. And then you sign up. And then it will show who you're sending these messages to. In my case, my two senators, Senator Fetterman and Senator McCormick in Pennsylvania, my representative, Representative Evans. And there's a message here that's been populated about these issues that if I want, I can edit. I'm in editing mode. I can change anything here that I don't think represents my perspective. I can hit save, and then I can hit submit. And it's that easy. I just emailed all three of my members of Congress, my two senators and my one representative, about these issues. It really does not take long. And I think getting those emails is really important. As I mentioned, from experience actually engaging with members on the Hill for many years, the volume of emails they receive on particular issues is something they track extremely closely. There's also a function here to call. And again, when you provide your number, it provides some of that. And there's a script here to help in calls with members of Congress. And then there's an opportunity to post on social media. So wanted to demonstrate how easy that is. And then if you want to know more about who your representatives are, there's a great tool called Find Your Representative. And all you need to do is pop in your zip code. I'll pop in the zip code of where I lived growing up. And sometimes that zip code is covered by two members, so you just pop in your street address. But if you want to learn more about that member, you can just click on them. And then all of a sudden you're at the website. Again, this is where you can sign up for events. You can get a newsletter often. You can check out press releases, see newsletter, subscribe here. If you're interested in getting more involved in understanding, whether public events are happening in your area or otherwise. The Senate can be really easy too. Senators often have multiple offices. It's not just about one office, maybe in the capital of the state where you might not be close to. I grew up in very rural Virginia. Let's see, Senator Warner is a senator in Virginia. He's got office information right now. Now I see that there's 6 different offices he has around the state. Probably I was closest to the Roanoke office where I grew up, and that has a phone number I can call. I can find out where it is, and if I want, I can reach out and set up a meeting about a particular issue. So it's really that simple to begin understanding who your elected leaders are, how to contact them, and start thinking about what you want to engage with them about. And so I've now been going on for 30 minutes, just longer than I thought I would. Um, so I'm going to pause at that point. I hope that was a helpful sort of overview of some of the basics of engaging advocacy. It's really important to understand this is meant to be accessible. Your members should be listening to their constituents. But in practice, I think a lot of people um, think it's a little bit of a daunting prospect to begin engaging in this kind of advocacy. And my hope is by providing some of this information, I can demonstrate that it's not as daunting as maybe it seems, and there are real ways you can make a difference in your community. Again, I talked a lot about Congress, but state and local elected officials operate a lot of the same way and are very interested in hearing from their constituents. And I think Andrew is going to help me out a little bit in answering any questions that are come up. And please do, if you have additional questions, pop them in the Q&A box.
Yeah, we got some good ones, which is great. So feel free to keep popping them in. I saw another one just pop in there actually right now. I want to emphasize how easy this website makes it though, because I have definitely done it and it makes it so easy. And I want to affirm if you don't know some of your local representation, there's no shame in looking it up because I had to do it literally 2 days ago for my Ohio State House rep because I knew who my senator was. I was fortunate enough to know that and look it up at one point, but I did not know who actually represented me in the state house. So no shame in looking at any of that up. But yeah, Danilo, we got a couple good questions, and I'm happy to help you out with some of these because a couple are kind of one and the same, but there's one that's a little bit crop hunger walk specific. So these two I'll merge together because they're kind of along the same line. So what's the best way we can encourage crop hunger walks to support CWS advocacy, as well as what's an easy way to include advocacy during my crop hunger walk? So I have a couple thoughts on that, but Danilo, if you want to take the lead a little bit on maybe even just how to support CWS advocacy, what are some ways they could maybe do that? And then I'll jump into how they can do it during their walk.
Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thrilled to get those questions, and I think it would be great to incorporate advocacy to the extent there is interest in the crop hunger walks. And again, ways to support serious advocacy, sharing those action alerts and using them is really important. I think one question I get a lot is like, how often should I use an action alert? You can use them as often as once a day, and it does still make a difference if you're consistently contacting your member about an issue, even if you're just one individual. But so use them as much as you would like, and sharing them with your communities, I think, can be really, really helpful. And also, there's a lot of other opportunities. So if you sign up for our mailing list, sign up for the State of Play, you'll find other opportunities where we're holding advocacy days, or we're reaching out to members of Congress and setting up meetings, and we're encouraging people to join them. So really encourage folks who are not already on some of our advocacy mailing lists, our State of Play newsletter, um, to join those newsletters as well, where there are consistent opportunities to engage with advocacy in a more topical moment. So signing up for action alerts and the State of Play newsletter is a great way of getting engaged as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Um, for all of you, if you're a team captain for your walk, or if you are the event coordinator, you can encourage your team captains, but really whoever you communicate with most, try to send them the resources that Danilo had referenced. Regarding getting it advocacy incorporated in Walk Day, there's a few different ideas you could do that I've seen done. We had that advocacy appeal for SNAP benefits pretty active last fall. And I had a couple walks actually do letter signing for that on our behalf that they sent to their senators, as well as I've seen my local walk here in Central Ohio. We had a QR code that took you to the action alert page. So if folks were interested in getting involved in advocacy, they could see what was going on right there, and even on their phones do it right then and there. So there's several different ways. If you are interested in getting it involved, like getting advocacy as part of your local crop hunger walk, don't hesitate to reach out to your community engagement specialist. They will be able to connect you to Danilo, even if they need resources or things like that, but more than happy to help with that.
Yeah, and just to jump in really quickly, I think happy to help, to the extent we often develop resources like just a five things to you can do one pager on a particular issue, or having a QR code ready. I know that's something, comms folks and again at crop walks have happened in the past. So if there's interest in having some of those resources and materials, I think we would be more than happy to support them.
Absolutely. That's great. So moving from there, we've got another one that's I've signed and sent pre-written letters and postcards to members of Congress in the past. How effective are those? So I guess going on the letter signing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, very effective. I think I guess that's one of the main things. Alongside, so emails, letters kind of fit within the sending email. Maybe letters are even maybe a little bit more effective because these days offices will get a lot more email traffic than they'll get, in terms of physical mail. So those things are extremely effective. As I mentioned, all of them are tallied. So even if you think I'm going to an intern somewhere in the office and they're throwing it away, it's actually not the case. It's one of the few ways that these congressional offices, and certainly state and local offices as well, have of understanding what their constituents care about. And so they really do tally all of it. I've seen one of the spreadsheets with all the tallied of how many phone calls we got on this issue. And how many postcards was sent, how many emails was received. So those things are really effective. I think as you kind of go up that engagement ladder, one of the most effective things you can do is set up a meeting with a staffer who works on the issue, um, or who is a local staff and is responsible for understanding what's happening locally. And you can do that just by, again, looking up your member of Congress, going to the contact me page and saying, hey, me and my community, or me and a couple others, here's who I am, and would love to set up a meeting virtually or in person at the office if you're close to the office. That can be a really effective way of engaging in advocacy too. But however it makes sense for you to engage, if you're interested, you can make an impact. So just by sending a postcard or sending an email does really make a difference as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in too because I saw a comment from our Fort Collins office. Don't hesitate to reach out to any of our local offices too that happen, especially if they're in your state, particularly if they're in your state, because they would be very aware of even some of the more local issues. I've actually done some local advocacy work through one of our affiliate offices actually here, but our local offices are more than happy to support anyone who's wanting to advocate on their behalf. So they are just an extension of us, local in the communities. So, and you can find a list of those offices online. It's pretty easy to find that. Another question, Danilo, this is a good one actually. Does it generally have more impact to contact a representative's local or DC office?
Great question. And not to sound like oh, I don't know what the analogy is, but I'm going to keep saying both are impactful. So I find that as a policy person whose work and team is based in DC, we often, of course, engage with the DC office. Um, However, it just like making a phone call matters, it matters that the local staff are telling the DC office people who might be working on a particular piece of legislation that this is what the community is saying. So sometimes what will happen is if you have a very specific, legislative ask, for example, like I want to support this bill, it can be good to talk to the DC staffer because they're the ones who are sort of responsible for educating the member about this legislation, might be responsible for getting co-sponsorship. So if you have a very specific ask, I want my member to pass this legislation or support this specific policy, I think it's often best to get to the DC office. But what you'll find is even when you engage with the local district office, if they think it's an issue that makes the most sense for the DC folks, they'll say that. They'll say like either I need to connect this to this person, or I'm going to invite this person to join our call because they're the ones who are who focus on it. So I would say in some ways it matters. Like the DC office is more effective if you're working with the staff person who covers that issue and you have a very specific legislative ask. If you're just wanting to raise a problem that's in the community and you want the office to care more about it, the district level staff, the local office can be perhaps more effective because the way that information is getting routed to the member is my local constituents care about this issue. And that's why I'm hearing about it locally. So both can be really impactful. Um, and we try to engage with both when we're doing advocacy with members.
If there's any other questions, feel free to type those in. I see a tech question. What is a QR code? So those are those little black and white squares that you see floating around that you can scan with your camera, and then it takes you to a link. So it's a live link. You can also just share a link, or you can do the letter signing. So, whatever your walk is comfortable with, we can make sure that we get you what you need to make that happen. So yeah, I know Erie, Pennsylvania, they did some letter signing for Snap, and they had clipboards with the letters, and all they had to do was sign, put their address, so they made sure the representatives were the right representatives. I'm from Ohio, so I was not able to do their letter signing. I mean, I could have, but then just sent it to mine. But they were doing it organized. So there's lots of ways that you can support. So if QR codes, you're not certain about that, totally fine. We can find ways to make sure that you can do it in your local community. I'm not really seeing anything else. I know there's some links put in the chat as far as how to connect with Danilo. Well, the work that Danilo is talking about, but those will also be in the follow-up. I'm certain of that, and so that way you can connect. We'll give people another minute or so if anything has come up. Oh, there is another question that came up. I'm glad we gave people a minute. Okay, actually, this is a good one. Is CWS coordinating with Bread for the World and other agencies on significant issues like the SNAP cuts?
Yes, and one of the things about CS's advocacy is it's very and has always been very coalitional. So we work with a number of different organizations on honestly all of our advocacy priorities because of this understanding that our voice collectively is more powerful. And Bread for the World are really leaders in the SNAP space. We've also worked with the Food Research and Action Center, which are also leaders in the SNAP and hunger space. I'd say Bread does a lot of the international work as well, whereas TRAC is more domestic focused on SNAP. But we do work closely with those and other partners on all of these policy issues to better understand what's happening on the ground and what policies make the most sense to support to try to address it. One of the things going on right now in the SNAP and hunger spaces is the House of Representatives is working on something called the Farm Bill, which sounds like it's just about farms, but it actually is a massive piece of legislation that covers all things agriculture, but also all things, international hunger response and SNAP. And there are efforts ongoing to try to rescind some of the dramatic cuts to SNAP that happened last year as part of this ongoing Farm Bill negotiation. I mean, one of the strange things about the Farm Bill, we could get into it at a lot of length, is that it doesn't really move every year. It passes like every 5 years. And so it's really a huge piece of legislation that requires a lot of careful understanding. And frankly, I don't have all that expertise, but folks at Bread and FRAC and others do. And so we do try to make sure we're aligned with those organizations when we're engaging in this kind of advocacy.
We love working in partnership. It's kind of what we do. All right. Very useful information we're hearing, so very good. Any last thoughts? If you have any questions, feel free to type those in. We don't want to hold anyone here longer than we need to, too. I mean, there's a lot of great information that you shared, Danilo, so maybe they have what they need, but we'll give them another minute or so since we're still under time right now. But yeah, a lot of thank yous. So yeah, really great information. And I just want to encourage everyone again, check out those links because it is made so simple. Like I don't view myself as an advocate, but with all the resources that are available to us on that website, it's just you know, so easy and anyone can do it. And there's scripts and it's just very, very simple.
And again, I think, on that, it's important to us as we're developing those scripts for them to be guidelines rather than requirements. So, you know, this is advocacy from your perspective and your voice. If you ever want to, like, you can edit those scripts anytime you want. You can just use them to figure out, contact information for your members and go and make your own contact. But really encourage, I think it's just important to be engaged with your elected leaders where you are, and to make sure they're hearing your perspective, whatever it is, and um, certainly hope that folks find use in the materials that we put together to help advocate on some of these particular important issues. But Andrew, you said you don't consider yourself an advocate. I think everyone on this call can be an advocate. It's really um, something that I think should be made even more simple than it is. The fact that we can't always find out when a town hall is being held by a member or where their public events might be. Um, but with some of these tools, hopefully, you all are either we're already on the path of being an advocate, or can get on that path.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to do it and care. That's what I've realized. Very cool. Actually, and one last question, I think, and unless other things come in while you're answering, but how many people at CWS are on the advocacy team?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, see, our policy team is 4 people, but the policy team is actually part of a bigger advocacy team that includes 2 others who do a lot of work internationally. We actually have someone based in Geneva, who does some of the international engagement with other countries and the United Nations. And then we have a team of organizers as well, refugee community organizers, that are based in Virginia, Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and then we have some affiliate organizers in Oregon, Kentucky, and Georgia. So I actually, I'm not sure the total number. I think it's around 15 of folks on our broader advocacy team that's split between this organizing work, refugee community organizing and leadership development, international engagement, and then our work with the policy team in Washington, D.C.
Great. I've met a number of the organizers too, and they're very informative. So if you are in any of those states that Danilo just referenced, definitely reach out. It's looking like folks are saying thank you and that they're appreciative of all the great information that you've shared. Yeah, and we have some webinars too. Oh, I think there's a question about the advocacy webinars. I think that's what Amir is asking about.
There is so CWS works with Refugee Council USA and We Are All America to do quarterly advocacy webinars. I think there is one coming up. Oof, I should know when the date is. But again, if you sign up for our list, you will get an invitation to that, if you haven't already, where we try to share kind of the state of play, what's going on, and also ways to take action. And we're hoping to do a lot more of those actually, and engaging with new audiences in the coming weeks and months. So please do stay tuned for that. I think we're hoping to provide more of these kinds of presentations and resources, and maybe additional resources that we haven't developed yet, to help people in their path to advocating on issues that they care about and that are impacting their communities. And so hopefully we'll have more of those opportunities moving forward. And as they come up, you all can invite others to them as well. And yeah, I just want to thank you all as well for participating and having interest in this work. So much going on. I know there can be desire sometimes to shut it out a little bit, and I completely understand that. But it's also really important when you have the energy and the space to engage and try to make a difference. So thank you all for being a part of the conversation.
We got a question about May the may the video be shared out? And yes, absolutely. So if you get the link to this and you think other people could benefit from this webinar, you are absolutely encouraged to share that with others who might benefit from hearing this. All of us are in places where advocacy can really make a difference, and so definitely share that out. And that should go out in the next day or so, couple days or so. I mean, it's normally within a couple of days of our recording, it happens. So yeah, yeah, of course. I think that might be it. Learned a lot. So Danilo, if you want to close us out, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. So first of all, thanks to Andrew and everyone on the CWS team who helped make this presentation possible and really easy. And again, really appreciate everybody for joining. Hopefully there are ways for you all to reach out if you have additional questions. And as I said, hope to provide these kinds of presentations more often. Certainly for folks who maybe have not engaged with our advocacy materials before and you start engaging, there might be some questions that come up. And if you sign up for our newsletters, you will be getting emails from us, and you can always respond to those emails and ask questions as well, and share information. So hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation and point of contact rather than just a one-time presentation. And so grateful to you all for joining and taking the time.